The train pulled into Ravel's Hollow just after dusk, the last of the sun washing the forested hills with copper light. I stepped down onto the cracked platform with a single suitcase and an envelope of legal papers, smelling the autumn leaves and locomotive coal I'd known as a child. If not for Grandmother May's funeral, I would never have come back. Yet even that solemn errand felt secondary to the quiet throb of dread that returned at the first glimpse of the belfry, and, beyond it, the slanted headstones of St. Lyria Cemetery. No one met me at the station. The Hollow's population had dwindled since the factory closed. My childhood friends were scattered, and my mother was buried on the opposite coast. Grandmother May had been the last tether, the keeper of brittle family lore and pursuer of strange hobbies, like charting the arc of the cemetery angel. I hailed the single cab still operating in town and rode the mile up the hill, watching the darkened windows of empty shops flicker past. When the car stopped outside the old Victorian house, every board and shutter familiar, I almost expected the kitchen light to bloom yellow and the door to swing open. Instead, the porch sagged, and knots of asters had grown wild around the steps. Inside, the air held an echo of lavender soap and dust. The funeral director had promised to deliver Grandmother's ashes in the morning, so the house felt both occupied and abandoned, a space waiting to be filled by words that would never again be spoken. I set my suitcase in the corridor, flicked on a lamp, and tried not to stare at the staircase where the framed family tree clung to the wall like a relic. Then I saw it. Grandmother's leather notebook on the hall table, its cracked spine wedging it open to a page of looping handwriting. Midway down, a single sentence quivered like a live wire. "One more degree, and the angel points at me." I pressed my thumb to the ink, half certain it would smear. She wrote that 4 weeks ago, just before the last full moon. The hair on my arms rose. I had not thought about the angel in years, but children in Raffles Hollow learn its story with the alphabet. St. Lyria Cemetery is older than the town itself. At its center stands a 10-foot statue carved from pearly limestone, an angel with outspread wings and one arm extended, finger forever outstretched as though directing travelers. According to local legend, after the sculptor was struck by lightning on the night of the unveiling, the angel began to turn. Not swiftly or dramatically, but 1 slender degree, no more, no less, each moon cycle. It completes a circle roughly every 30 years, and when its pointing hand lines perfectly with a house, someone who lives there dies within the month. Coincidence, my mother insisted, packing our things the week after it aligned with our neighbor's farmhouse, and Mr. Grafton passed quietly in his sleep. Grandmother May disagreed. Prophecy. She kept a brass compass, a stack of maps, and a telescope trained on the statue, noting every incremental shift. I'd mocked it all in college essays and therapy sessions, dismissing the angel as superstition, yet now the notebook sat in my palm, testimony that Grandmother feared the statue had chosen her. I barely slept. Drafts prowled the hall, boards creaked like warning sighs, and the moon climbed above the cypress grove, bright enough to silver the curtains. At dawn, I pulled on a coat and walked up Overlook Lane toward the cemetery gate, ignoring the cold bite of dew through my sneakers. St. Lyria felt smaller than I remembered, but the headstones still leaned like crooked teeth. Crows scattered at my approach, leaving black feathers snagged on the iron fence. The angel stood at the center as always, marble eyes lifted to eternity, its extended finger pale against the sky. Grass grew in tufts around the pedestal, but someone had swept the gravel path freshly. I circled the statue until I stood behind its back. Grandmother's drawings flooded my thoughts. A compass rose, the angel in the middle, a red line slashing across toward Dovecote Street. Her own house. I checked the alignment by sight alone, but from here the angel's finger seemed to point several degrees to the right of May's roof, nearer the cluster of cottages by Swan Pond. Perhaps she had miscalculated, or perhaps in the final weeks the statue made a sharper pivot, impatient to deliver its ultimatum. You must be May Bowen's granddaughter. a voice rasped. I spun. A man in a caretaker's coat rested on a rake handle a few yards off. His face was seamed and windburned, but his eyes were quick. "I'm Claire," I said, forcing politeness. "You knew her?" "Knew her well enough to argue twice a month," he answered. "Name's Silas Mott. I keep the grounds." He thumped the rake handle toward the angel. He believed that old hunk of stone commanded life and death. I told her folk die because their hearts give out, not because limestone decides it's time. "Seems reasonable," I murmured. Silas examined me. "Yet here you are before breakfast. Just like she used to come, checking its angle, apple doesn't fall far." I opened my mouth to deny it, and found no words. Instead I asked, "Do you know if it moved since last full moon?" He shrugged. "I marked the spot each equinox as a courtesy, but I'm no mathematician. She had her own system, protractors, star charts. Might be worth studying her notes, if you're feeling restless." When I left, Silas returned to trimming a yew, singing under his breath. The melody drifted after me like a lullaby turned sideways. Back at the house, I brewed coffee and gathered grandmother's notebooks into neat piles. 29 volumes, dated by moon phase, cross-referenced by meteor showers and obituaries. I leafed through the most recent, tracing lines of delicate script, rotational deviation steady at 1, counterclockwise true north. Prognosis, intersection with Bowen residence within 1 lunation. Earlier volumes recorded prior deaths. Mr. Grafton, Miss Ellery, the school teacher. The twins lost to scarlet fever. In each case, May provided vectors, azimuths, moon phase, distance. Nothing a coroner would deem scientific, yet the pattern grew harder to shrug off. Still, probability is a trickster. Align any rotating object long enough with a cluster of houses, and eventually someone within those walls will die. The older I became, the more the legend looked like a self-fulfilling curse. Anxiety breeds illness. Dread leads to accidents. Rumor becomes mortal, yet the lines tightened in my chest when I read May's final entry. If Pointer remains true after Samhain, the next soul is mine. Accept. Prepare. But leave record for Claire. She signed her name in a wavering hand. That afternoon I went through closets for funeral clothes. In a hat box I found a brass key and a note. For the crypt vault. If desperate, the crypt lay beneath the cemetery chapel, a damp cellar housing municipal archives, old church relics, and the caretaker's shed of tools. I never knew May had access. The discovery felt ominous, but curiosity overruled doubt. I waited for sunset, then crossed the lanes to the cemetery once more. Fog pooled low, braiding between headstones. The chapel door squealed, but the key turned smoothly as though recently used. I slipped inside. Shadows pressed around me. My phone flashlight cut a weak cone, revealing stacked ledgers, a broken pew, cobwebbed candlesticks. In the center stood something that stopped my breath. A wooden model of the angel, perhaps 3 feet tall, mounted on a round table. Thin wires ran beneath to a series of weights and pulleys anchored with lead and river stones. The miniature statue faced a tiny map of Raval's Hollow etched into the table, houses marked with pins. I leaned closer. The mechanism was complex, yet handmade. The weights were calibrated to drop each lunar cycle, rotating the figurine by incremental jerks. So this was May's experiment, a parallel device to test whether a predictable mechanical rotation could mimic the cemetery statue. If both pointed at the same house before a death, the implication was supernatural. If not, coincidence. Under the table lay her last notepad. The top page revealed 2 columns, rotation of model and rotation of actual. The numbers matched for months, diverged slightly, then matched again. My grandmother had tried to disprove her own obsession, and failed. Footsteps creaked overhead. I snapped off the phone, light, and froze. The caretaker's voice drifted down the stairs. "Shame to see you rummaging around in secrets, Ms. Bowen." Silas stepped into the beam of moonlight from the high windows, trench coat flung open. "Your grandma asked me to destroy that contraption after she passed," he said. "I reckoned you'd sleep easier if the evidence vanished. You said you didn't share her beliefs." "Don't, but I respected hers." He walked to the model, lifted one of the lead weights, and set it in my palm. "Feel that? Gravity and gears, nothing mystical." "It still mimicked the angel," I countered. "Because she built it from the angel," he replied softly. "May spent a season under that statue with measuring tape and chalk, learning how it moved. She found a hairline seam at the base and a rusted ratchet inside. 30 years ago, some town councilman thought a rotating angel would drum up tourism. They installed a clockwork device powered by rainfall, but the engineer died and nobody kept winding it. The gear jammed halfway. So each heavy storm or ground trimmer nudged it a little. 1 degree here, another there." I stared. "So, you're saying the statue moves by accident? Not by design? Not by fate?" "Near enough. But May's family kept dying when it pointed their way. That part she never solved." Silas set the weight down and rubbed his knuckles. "I knew your mother. She was frightened the night she packed you up. Blamed the angel. Drove too fast on the highway. Accident took her 2 counties over. Does it matter where the finger aimed?" I swallowed, remembering asphalt grit and cold hospital lights. My father had called it random tragedy. Now Silas implied the fear itself killed her. He gestured at the notebook. "May wanted you to see behind the curtain, break the spell. That's why she left you the key. Yet she still believed it foretold her own death." "Old habits die hard," he sighed. "So ask yourself, do you believe?" I didn't answer. Instead, I climbed the stone steps and stepped out beneath the moon. The real angel gleamed white against the bruised sky, finger aligned with the far cottages, or so it seemed. Maybe perception skewed under emotion, maybe the lens of fear warped straight lines. I spent the next 2 days preparing the modest memorial, greeting distant cousins, accepting casseroles. The story of the angel hovered on every tongue, the favorite ghost tale of Ravel's Hollow, but no one raised it in my presence. Perhaps they sensed I carried enough ghosts already. That 3rd night, the moon reached full. I lay awake, the house too silent, grandmother's absence a hollow in my lungs. At midnight, a brittle crack echoed outside, like stone scraping stone. I sat up, pulse hammering, and before reason intervened, I threw on boots and grabbed a flashlight. Fog cloaked the front yard. I followed the dirt path through the gate, every part of me rejecting the direction my feet traveled. At the cemetery, I halted. The angel stood in its customary place, yet the hand now pointed, unmistakably, at grandmother's house. No guessing, no parallax error. The line from fingertip through the dark trees intersected precisely with the gable over May's attic window, my window tonight. My breath steamed in the cold. Logic vanished. Probability felt like a brittle toy. I thought of heart attacks, falling downstairs, aneurysms, blossoming like dark flower. A whisper rose in my mind. It will be you. But another voice, the calm cadence of engineering lectures, of Silas's explanation, reminded me. Gears, storms, tremors, a housing too long neglected. If fear completed the prophecy, refusing to fear might undo it. I walked the perimeter, studying the pedestal. In the flashlight's glare, I saw the hairline seam Silas described. I knelt, searched for the ratchet, and found a corroded metal tooth. Somewhere within, springs and counterweights strained against rust. I wrapped my fingers around the angel's ankle and pushed. Stone groaned but remained immovable. I needed leverage. From the tool shed, I borrowed a crowbar and a can of WD-40. The irony of assaulting a holy effigy was not lost on me, but righteousness burned hotter than reverence. At each, pride the statue shuddered, pebbles cascaded from the base, and with a final heave the mechanism freed, swinging the angel's arm perhaps 15 degrees clockwise away from the house, away from any building, toward the dark stretch of forest. Metals squealed, the pedestal vibrated, then all settled. I stepped back, panting. The angel now pointed at nothing but pine trunks and wind. Silas arrived while I was wiping stone dust from my face. He took in the crowbar, the skewed angel, and let out a slow whistle. That's one way to shut it up. I didn't break it, I said, just relined. He nodded. So where does that leave the curse? Nowhere, I answered. Let's see if nothing happens. The coming days tasted of waiting. I half expected lightning to strike me for desecration, or the town council to arrest me for vandalism. Neither occurred. Morning blended into mundane tasks. I sorted May's clothing for donation, corrected her utilities, arranged the estate sale. Each morning I visited the cemetery. The angel, frozen at its new angle, pointed always into the indifferent trees. 1 degree would have shifted it onto the old logging road, 2 degrees toward the abandoned textile mill, but it held still. On the 7th day after the full moon, I brewed tea in May's kitchen, paused, and realized without drama that I felt alive, undamaged, unpromised to any grave. When I returned to the cemetery, I carried a wrench and a can of white paint. Silas met me at the gate with a toolbox and a smile that exposed a missing tooth. Thought I'd help, he said. Angel could use a proper cleaning, maybe a new dress of sealant. Together we removed the corroded ratchet entirely, filled the cavity with epoxy, and locked the statue forever in its forestward pose. I painted over the weather stains, tracing the gentle folds of the marble robe, the feathers of its wings. Silas adjusted a floodlight to bathe the angel in constant electric glow, rendering its old nocturnal secrecy impossible. Tourists might puzzle at the angel's random gesture. Locals might invent a new legend, a guardian watching the woods for wildfire or lost hikers. The cemetery grew quieter with the passing months, release from the hushed reverence fear once demanded. I stayed through winter to settle the last affairs, and spring coaxed purple crocus through the frost. Not a single unnatural death occurred in Ravel's Hollow over that span. Of course, people still aged, caught influenza, circled the slow orbit of mortality we all inhabit, but no sudden tragedies answered the angel's phantom call. Sometimes, strolling the gravel paths, I think of Grandmother May, head bent over her charts. I wonder whether she'd approve my solution or cluck at my sacrilege. I like to believe she would laugh, pat my cheek and say, "Love always rewrites old stories, Claire, even stone ones." When I finally boarded the train back to the city, I carried her remaining notebook, blank pages, waiting for new myths. In the margin of the first, I wrote, "The angel points nowhere now, and in that void, we choose where to live."